English aristocrat, zoologist, filmmaker, Soviet spy, and the most important man in table tennis history. The sport of table tennis that we know today is largely the result of the work of one man, Ivor Montagu. When talking about Ivor Montagu's life, there's so many avenues you can go down. I'm going to try and focus on his work in table tennis, but as you will see, everything in his life was interwoven, and usually the thread that joined everything together was his communist political stance. The Honourable Ivor Montagu was born in April 1904, the son of Louis Montagu, the second Baron Swathling. Ivor Montagu's grandfather, the first Baron Swathling, Samuel Montagu, had made a fortune in merchant banking and was one of Britain's richest men. Samuel Montagu gained his title after becoming a member of the House of Lords. As there was already a Lord Montagu, Baron Swathling took his name from the village that bordered his Hampshire estate. The Montagu family had connections throughout the upper crust of English society. The only thing that may have marked them out as outsiders was that they were one of only a few Jewish families with titles. Ivor Montagu's mother, Gladys Montagu, could count Princess Victoria Mary as one of her close friends. She would become Queen Mary when her husband became King George V in 1911. The vast majority of Ivor Montagu's life would be spent supporting an ideology that wished to bring down the class of people he was surrounded by. Ironically, it would be his own class status that would help him pursue this. From quite early on, and much to the horror of his parents, the young Ivor Montagu was attracted by radical left-wing politics. At just 14, he'd already joined the British Socialist Party. The previous year, a communist revolution had been declared in Russia, in which King George V's cousin, the Tsar, had been executed at the hands of Bolsheviks. Another key aspect of Ivor Montagu's childhood was sport. Whilst his two older brothers, Stuart and Ewan, were talented athletes, the same could not be said for Ivor. Enthusiasm wasn't the issue. He loved sport, but he often found himself relegated to the role of umpire or scorer. There was one sport that Ivor Montagu was slightly better at, if you could even call it a sport at this time, and that was table tennis. Upon Ivor's request, a table tennis table was set up at their Kensington Court address in London. It would become a major feature of the family household. Table tennis had been around since the 19th century. The exact origins are contested, and in truth we probably can't point to a single moment or person. The game was very popular amongst the British Army, and with its expansive empire, it meant that the game could spread all over the world. From the British soldiers, the game would be picked up by local populations. However, the game was never organised effectively. There was no unifying governing body or even standardised rules. The size of the tables, the size of the balls, the scoring systems, they could vary everywhere you went. Even the name could change. Gossamer, whiff-waff, table tennis, or perhaps the most commonly used was ping pong. The lack of cohesion meant that in an era when other sports were creating clubs and organising leagues, table tennis was little more than a pastime, a fad, a game, rather than a serious sport. By the time Ivor Montagu was a student at Cambridge University in 1921, the ping pong fad was supposedly over. At Cambridge, studying was quite low down on Ivor Montagu's priorities list. At the top would be politics, sport, and making new friends. After dabbling in a few different societies, Ivor decided that ping pong was the society that he could best achieve this in. With money left over from his grandfather's allowance, he purchased 2 table tennis tables and created the Cambridge University Ping Pong Club, and went about arranging tournaments. It was an immediate success, and the tournaments were well attended. Ivor even played in the tournaments himself, but rarely got beyond the early rounds. Matches against Oxford University were also arranged. The success of the University Society caught the attention from people outside looking to resurrect the fortunes of the game. Ivor's background and the Oxbridge Association could give the game the legitimacy its advocates were seeking. The Ping Pong Association was formed, and the 18-year-old Ivor Montagu was made its chairman. Ivor Montagu was also asked to draft up some rules for the sport, something that was deeply needed if the game was to develop. Ping pong was the name of the sport that Ivor was creating. However, ping pong was actually a trademark term, owned by the toy maker Jakes & Son. After the toy maker approached Ivor, the decision was made to call the sport table tennis, and thus the Table Tennis Association was formed. This would be the precursor to the English Table Tennis Association and Table Tennis England as we have today. Yes, Ivor Montagu loved the sport he was creating, but from the very start, Ivor Montagu viewed table tennis as a vehicle for politics and the spread of communism, which he described as a crusade. The low costs of table tennis and the fact it was played indoors meant Ivor believed it was suited to the working class. Everything Ivor Montagu did was with politics in mind, whether this was the zoology he was studying at Cambridge or his later film career. Through zoology, he managed to secure a visa to travel to Russia in the early 1920s. On the surface, this was to study Prometheus mice in the Caucasus Mountains. However, in reality, he was more interested in learning about the communist society that was developing following the Russian Revolution. This would begin a long relationship between Ivor Montagu and the Soviet Union. It was in this time period that Ivor Montagu founded the Film Society. The Film Society would also be used to promote the cause of communism. Ivor Montagu's career in film would be highly successful, and he formed a strong working relationship and friendship with Alfred Hitchcock. Ivor Montagu has post-production credits on a number of Alfred Hitchcock films, including The 39 Steps, Sabotage, and The Secret Agent. Anyways, back to table tennis. Through clever marketing in national newspapers and a new network of table tennis clubs that was set up and down Great Britain, interest in the sport was once again growing. The next step was to take the now organised sport international, and the European Championships was organised for 1926 to be hosted in London. Teams from France, Germany, Slovakia and others attended. There was also a team comprised of Indian students that were based in London. Ivor Montagu, spotting an opportunity, changed what had been intended as a European Championships into a World Championships. This was the first Table Tennis World Championships in a line that stretches forward to the World Championships that we have today. The tournament gained the approval of Lord and Lady Swaithling, who were happy that their son was involved in something other than politics, and they paid for a trophy to be made, which became known as the Swaithling Cup. This cup is still competed for at World Team Table Tennis Championships today. At the first World Championships, the Swaithling Cup was won by the Hungarian men's team. Hungary dominated this first World Championships, and they won the men's and women's singles and the men's and women's doubles in addition to the Swaithling Cup. Hungary would be a dominant force in the early decades of World Table Tennis Championships. The tournament was a success. It was well attended, and now was the time to capitalise. Whilst representatives of all the different nations were in one place, the International Table Tennis Federation was founded. The 9 founding nations held their first meeting at the Montagu family home in London. The 22-year-old Ivor Montagu was elected the ITTF's first president, a position he would hold for over 40 years. After all, it was Ivor Montagu's energy and money that enabled this to happen. The next Table Tennis World Championships would be held in 1928 in Stockholm, and then annually after this. The further spread of table tennis was at the forefront of Ivor Montagu's mind. So when, in 1927, the second Baron Swaithling, Ivor Montagu's father, was to travel to Japan, Ivor packed in his luggage a copy of a guidebook on table tennis Ivor Montagu had written. In Japan, table tennis was already played. However, they played on different sized tables and with different rules. In 1929, Japan joined the ITTF. Ivor Montagu was certainly no conservative when it came to his leadership of the ITTF, and was always quick to act in the interests of the game. So for example, in 1936, when a single point took over 2 hours and most of the crowd had left, the ITTF had already convened a meeting to limit the length of games. In the 1950s, when Japanese players started using sponge layers on their rackets, and the established players protested about this, Ivor was quick to jump to their defence. The ITTF was also one of the first sports organisations to have a strong stance on the apartheid regime in South Africa. Just as collecting specimens of Prometheus mice in the Caucasus Mountains had been a reason to travel to the Soviet Union, table tennis would allow Ivor Montagu to connect with the communist world. Straight after the 1929 World Championships, which were held in Budapest, Ivor Montagu would travel to meet Leon Trotsky, who had been exiled from the Soviet Union by Stalin. Ivor Montagu, however, was still loyal to the Soviet Union despite the horrors he must have known about. Incidentally, the 1929 World Championships in Budapest were won by a young Englishman called Fred Perry. Already by the 1930s, British intelligence forces had Ivor Montagu on their radar, and they were building a file on him. It's unclear exactly at what stage Ivor Montagu went from being an ideological supporter of the Soviet Union to being a spy, but certainly by the Second World War he had a direct line with Moscow. Ivor Montagu's identity as a spy was revealed in the Venona project, which was an American project to decode Soviet intelligence communications. Ivor Montagu's code name used by the Soviets was Intelligentsia. With all the suspicions and potential evidence that Ivor Montagu was working for a foreign power, he never seemed to get into any trouble. Why was this the case? Perhaps it was his closeness to people in power and the potential embarrassment this could cause. Ivor's older brother, Ewan, had been involved in Operation Mincemeat. Operation Mincemeat was a highly secret Second World War mission which involved dressing up a corpse as a British soldier, along with forged papers supposedly detailing an Allied plan to invade Europe through Greece. The body was then dropped off the coast of Spain to be picked up by German spies. The Germans interpreted the papers to be genuine, and reinforcements were sent to Greece. This allowed the Allied forces to invade largely unhindered through Italy. A film was made about the mission in 2021 called Operation Mincemeat, in which Ewan Montagu was played by Colin Firth. Ivor Montagu was played by Mark Gatiss. After the Second World War was over, the ITTF was reconvened, once again with Ivor Montagu at its helm, and World Championships would take place from 1947. Ivor Montagu would be instrumental in the inclusion of China into the world of table tennis. After the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949, the Chinese Communist Party came to power under the leadership of Chairman Mao. Within weeks of the news reaching England, Ivor Montagu was writing overtures to the new regime and actively encouraging the People's Republic of China to apply to join the ITTF. Ivor Montagu was keen for another communist nation to join the world of table tennis. No doubt Ivor Montagu had read the numerous reports of Chinese communists playing table tennis in their mountain hideouts during the Civil War. Chairman Mao and other top Communist Party leaders were said to be keen table tennis players. This was everything Ivor Montagu had wanted. Table tennis and the revolution hand in hand. At this time, the communist-led People's Republic of China was not recognised by Western nations and the UN as the legitimate government of China. Instead, they recognised the Republic of China led by nationalist Chiang Kai-shek. The nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, only controlled the island of Taiwan by this stage. It would not be until 1971 that the People's Republic of China would take a seat within the UN, in part the result of ping-pong diplomacy. And yet, here we were in the 1950s, and the ITTF was actively encouraging the involvement of the People's Republic of China in table tennis, a few of its own rules being bent along the way. Ivor Montagu would visit the People's Republic of China in 1952 and meet with top Communist Party officials. There were a few things to iron out before the People's Republic of China would agree to join the ITTF. One of the key demands of the People's Republic of China was that Taiwan, the Republic of China, would only join the ITTF if it played under the name Taiwan People's Republic of China. Of course, Ivor Montagu, wanting to accommodate his fellow communists and encouraged them to join the ITTF, agreed to their demands. The timing of the ITTF was perfect. Other sports organisations such as the IOC or FIFA followed the Western line that the People's Republic of China was not the legitimate government of China. Also, the new regime was looking to shake off China's image as the sick man of Asia, and sport was one way that they could do this. Table tennis was already popular within China, and it fitted with communist ideals of a sport that could be played by the masses. The rest, as they say, is history. Rong Guotuan would win the 1959 Table Tennis World Championships, which were held in Dortmund, and became China's first world champion in any sport. The sport was further established as the national sport of China in 1961, when it hosted the World Table Tennis Championships in Beijing, the first major international sports tournament to be held in the country. Again, this was down to the influence of Ivor Montagu, who put the offer to host the championships to the communist regime. The sport we know today is one dominated by Chinese players. It is possible that this might not have been the case if it wasn't for Ivor Montagu. Another sport could have easily stepped in without such a proactive and ideologically driven leader at its helm. Ivor Montagu resigned as ITTF president in 1968. He had turned a disorganised pastime into a global sport. His impact on table tennis is unquestionable. However, his overall legacy is perhaps more controversial. He remained a committed communist right up until his death in 1984. This was in spite of the obvious shortcomings of many of these regimes, and even when some of his close personal friends would become victims, he was always quick to justify these regimes. I've barely scratched the surface when it comes to Ivor Montagu's life. I could have gone deeper into his film career, which included a film he made during the Spanish Civil War, and his many friendships in the film industry, including Charlie Chaplin. I could have gone into his scandalous marriage, or maybe his further zoological and conservation work, his witnessing of the Nuremberg trials as a journalist, his love of Southampton Football Club, or maybe even the Lenin Peace Prize he received in 1959 directly from the Soviet Union. But if I was to cover all of Ivor Montagu's life, this video would be never ending. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching.